Hey, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today is the second in our Watchmen double feature. Last week, if you were listening, well, I guess that's how we're putting these out, you would have seen the episode where we dissected a lot of the Watchmen show. And this time we're going to talk about sort of what you can steal. So this is like for the writers episode. And just if you didn't watch the last one or listen to the last one, we do have a lot of our studio on here, a little less than the last one. We have but 10 people instead of 3 today. And just so we're clear, I'm going to spoil the hell out of the Watchmen TV show. So if you haven't seen that and want to see that and don't want spoilers, then maybe don't listen to this yet. So with that said, here we go. So how's this different from the last episode?
Well, the last episode, we got all the way through everything we wanted to talk about up to characters, but it seemed like a really great breaking point because the first thing we're talking about now is characters. So it all kind of just works out.
Unless you just want to make this show about characters and do the writer's version later and do a third episode.
Well, no, it is characters, but it's introductions, it's arcs, it's all that stuff, but it's what we're taking away from it. So it's what did we learn through the characters in the show that we're going to basically be using in our own work or that influenced us in some way. The way, again, Bonnie's very thorough. She made us a lot of notes. And so we have the different characters. There's 5 characters, and we have their different arcs that we're going to talk about each of them. So, so let's take a step back before we talk about characters and say, did you guys have thoughts on the show just in general and what like big main takeaways that as creators, as storytellers that you have? Anybody want to start there? Bonnie?
I think one of the most amazing things about the show in terms of how it was written was how they handled the exposition, especially the historical level. They one of the things they did consistently was first they would show you the historical event or some aspect of it from a really personal level, and you didn't necessarily know what was going on or why it was happening. You had the person who it was happening to, you got their fear, their confusion, and their whatever they were feeling. But then later they kept coming back to it from different perspectives. Like, for example, the 1921 massacre, we got it from Will's perspective as a boy. He doesn't understand why it's happening or really what's happening. All he knows is that he's being shoved into a trunk and he doesn't know if he's going to see his parents again. And then he sees Tulsa burning behind him in episode 1, but then like in episode 2.
But in case you heard episode 1, there weren't that many people in Tulsa. It wasn't a big deal.
Right. Well, it's still a big deal for him.
Such a dick.
But then in episode 2, Angela goes into the museum and you get these very short snippets from holograms of different people who were there who are telling their story of it. And then she goes up to the kiosk and she gets the government's version of the story, which is like, we know you suffered this trauma and we want to give you reparations. And then in episode 3, we get the FBI briefing and we get the FBI's perspective on like, why did this massacre and the aftermath of it cause us to have all these law enforcement problems, right? It's like, so the FBI is talking about how the reparations were a problem because all these people who got their money moved back in and that increased tensions between the white and black communities there and made, basically forced them to have to do the whole thing with masks. And so you kind of get like a little bit of that history from law enforcement side. And then in episode 6, we have the conversation between Will and June where it takes it back to the personal, but now we're kind of getting June's perspective on the massacre. And it kind of gives you all these different perspectives on it without ever telling you this is why it happened. This is what happened. Like they could have given you like a huge documentary on this was the night that Tulsa burned, right? But instead they kind of let you piece together why it mattered from all those different perspectives. And they did the same thing with White Knight too. Like it starts with Angela telling her kids' class that she's getting shot. And then we see her in the hospital in episode 2 and she's learning that her partner died and she decides to adopt the kids. And then episode 3, there's stuff in the FBI briefing on White Knight and what it meant for law enforcement. And then in episode 8, we get Dr. Manhattan's account of what happened the night he saved Angela, which kind of, again, brings it back to personal. And then in episode 9, you get Keen's speech about why white knight was so important and why they have to keep doing things like that. So we even get like the white supremacist perspective on that historical event. And again, they don't ever give you the documentary on it or the info dump. They let you
just the
read,
emotional impact of it. It's like you got a timeline of emotional trauma in the series. And I've never quite, I mean, I've seen things done that way. Orange is the New Black did that really well. You know, I mean, it even refers to itself as an empathy drama, right? It's, you know, we're giving you this backstory in this order with these pieces so that you feel this way. And this show did it, but in a much more tightly confined space, and with like being like comic booky escapist type entertainment. Like, you know, the show itself was wearing a mask. It was pretending to be one thing, but was actually being something else entirely. And that was pretty magical. I know Ben has something about this, but real quick, because you were talking about you just triggered my memory on something that I really wish I'd brought up on world building. An example that I just loved is a world where Nixon was replaced as a president by Robert Redford, who has just been president for like 1,000,000 years.
Yeah, I forgot about the Redford thing. That was wonderful.
Then they passed reparations, and they're called Redfordations, which of course they would be.
Oh my God, I never made that connection. I thought the kids were mispronouncing at the beginning, and by the time I learned Redford, I didn't make the connection.
Yes, they're Redfordations. Because of course, there's no world where Redford's president, there's reparations, and they're not called Redfordations, right? So like just little touches like that where it was all of course stuff. Like once you believe that Redford is president, you believe this other thing. Dave just wants everybody to know that according to historians, not him, there were between...
What? No, wait a minute. I'm going to come to Dave's rescue on this. Sean says that event actually happened. The KKK came and annihilated the whole town. And Dave said, wait, it wasn't the whole town. He's just correcting you.
They destroyed what was known as Black Wall Street. They destroyed the town, but there were like 6,000 people there. 300 were killed. So not everybody died.
It was a huge tragedy, but I think Dave is trying to say it wasn't exactly the way that it was in Watchmen.
A giant squid didn't drop down and kill everyone.
Yeah, that never happened. Okay, so Ben.
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredible study in mystery boxes and in closing arcs. Like it's so cool to me to see that level of intricacy and intention and coherence underlying it. It's like we're talking about, there are all these weird elements that if you buy them, it really works, but they give you a reason to buy it. Like it does all fit together. There is like a logical coherence to it all. And like you can tell a story where it's mostly just fairly straightforward things happening and it's very believable. Or you can tell a story where like all these weird, intriguing things happen, but then you never really explain why, you know, like a Lost. And it's just like, it's cool while it lasts, but then it's just disappointing in the end. But I love this kind of thing that like takes big risks, like really goes out on a limb, but knows exactly what it's doing, like does it with real confidence.
Yes, it's all the stuff that I wanted from Lost.
So satisfying, yeah.
Right, Lost never took it to the end, you know. But it was like he learned from his ways and then came back and got it right. Dan.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, that's a great example with the Lost is to trust your reader or your viewer in this case, that if you're going to put these mystery boxes out there, that they're going to be able to open those on their own without you having to expose everything. Or like Monty said, you do your exposition. It's kind of the classic show don't tell. You do your exposition through the character and not a narrator or, you know, 1,000 different backflashes or whatever. So to trust your reader because they're going to figure it out, and to take that chance to do that, even though you might get some readers or viewers are going to be like, I didn't get episode 3 or whatever, and maybe they got to dig a little farther, or maybe they're still a little unsatisfied, but better that than going the opposite direction where you're just explaining everything.
Dave.
I think a good spiritual precursor to Watchmen, rather than Lost, would be the other series he did for HBO, The Leftovers, which did a lot of good world building and touched on some of the same themes of like pain and like not knowing what happened to the people. That show's all about grief and pain and unresolved.
So I just saw I've seen The Leftovers pilot. I haven't seen the show, but I just watched it because of how good Watchmen is. I'm like, what else has this guy done? But for some reason, I thought that The Leftovers was slow, and the first season was kind of didn't really go anywhere. And was that not true?
Second season was better to me. I haven't seen the third one because I didn't have HBO for a while after that. Now that I have it, I want to rewatch it.
Yeah, I watched the pilot and I thought, this is stunning. I
loved it.
I was immediately captivated. I was curious about so many things, but it was like the pilot of Watchmen. I'm like, I know this is gonna go somewhere cool. I'll find out why everyone's wearing white and not talking but chain smoking later. Like, I'm okay. And yeah, I'm real curious to see where that goes. I think Ben.
Yeah, I think one really interesting narrative question is, how do you signal to the reader that you can trust that this will go somewhere? Like, I went into this, like I said, with lots of external indications, like so many people that I trust who have good taste had said, like, it's amazing, it starts out super weird, but stick with it, it's totally worth it in the end. And I'm not sure if you have to do that. Like, it could just be readers or watchers who are willing to go with you will get rewarded. But I think there have to be ways to signal, like, this isn't just a random shit we're doing. We know where it's going. Like, this will be worth it. Stick with us.
Well, I think there are indicators for sure. But I think the biggest one for me is reputation. So like, I saw a different version of Leftovers pilot after The Watchmen than I would have if I'd seen it a month before, because like, I'd already seen him just totally deliver. So I know he's got it. I don't have any lost baggage with me as I'm watching, that pilot. So I think and I think every creator listening can really take that away. If you build a relationship with your audience, they trust you. So if you do something weird, they're like, they got it. Bonnie.
I think, like, in terms of internal indicators, if you see them handling characters with a lot of depth, a lot of times people who are, when you see that being done really well and you see that the characters are going somewhere, for me, it's easier to trust that the story is also going to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's good advice. Joel.
It's a lot of times it's about the lies. I mentioned this in the chat, that it's not the lies that the characters tell, but it's rather who they're telling the lies to. A lot of times that illustrates a character way better than what they're actually saying, especially when they're lying to themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and this is a big theme in the company. When you're looking at somebody's secrets, like, that's a really good way to define a character. So that's actually a perfect transition. Let's talk about the characters. Let's just kind of go through each one. We'll talk about what we learned from them, kind of how well, let's talk about arcs first. So Will Reeves is also Hooded Justice, which is, some reinvention from the first show, but as we talked about in the last episode, it's more evolution than anything. So Bonnie, I'm just going to kick most of this over to you, and then anybody else who wants to add, please do. But what is Will's arc? What are we supposed to get away from Will?
I think Will's arc is one of going from idealism to disillusionment. I think he has this terrible experience and he wants to make society right. And we see the really cool thing about that movie at the very first scene when he's a boy in the theater is it basically tells you what the life story is that he's trying to live. Mm-hmm. Like, he aspires to be a Black man who can find white corruption in white society and take it down. And he tries
that
to
little
do that.
Piano thing that they do all through, like, every time that theme is present, is just amazing.
Yes. So he tries to do that first as a cop, and then he tries to do it as Hooded Justice, and he doesn't just get disillusioned with society, but like even the superheroes, like, he is the superhero that they're using as the face of the movement, and he has to pretend to be white to that group of superheroes, right? So he just gets completely disillusioned by the idea that who he is ever going to be the person who's going to be able to change things.
And even that's layered too, because he has to lie about who he is, both as a superhero, but his sexual identity he has to also lie about.
Yes, and I think that the moment of change for him is when he has that moment where he goes and he figures out that Frank is the one, but in the Cyclops, and that Frank's warehouse is right next to the theater where that terrible riot happened. And it's the first time you actually see his two identities.
There's only like
together.
2 people in that riot, though. Really?
Well, yeah.
Shut
but
up.
like it's the impetus for him to go in and uncover Frank's Cyclops organization in there with the projectors. And like he's wearing a police uniform, and he goes and he puts the hood on and he just kills everyone, right? And burns the building down. It's the first time you see his vigilante self through the hood.
That's my
with
favorite scene.
Oh, I love that scene. It was so beautiful.
His origin story for his costume with the actual noose, like,
I knew that right away, by the way.
that shit was awesome. Yeah, that shit was awesome.
Yeah, so I think that when he comes home, it's like he finally lets his vigilante side out with his public side, and then he goes home and sees that his kid is trying to be a vigilante like him, and he realizes, oh shit, like I just basically put my kid into the same hell that I've been living my entire life.
And okay, so Will is Angela's grandfather, which we find out, I think, in episode 3, maybe. So what is, okay, well, I think, Ben, do you want to talk about Will? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
just
go ahead.
real quick, I love also that he takes Bass Reeves' last name, like Bass Reeves
Yes, yeah.
from the film, because I guess his family's died. I guess he probably knows his last name, but yeah, taking that on is a really cool touch.
Yeah, again, just all those small world building touches are wonderful. Okay, so Angela is Will's granddaughter, and I would say she is the main character, if there's a main character, although, I mean, there are a lot of characters, but I think it's probably Angela's story more than anybody else's. So what is her arc?
I think her arc is someone she's had her heritage and her cultural identity taken away from her, and she's really trying hard to be okay with it. Like her superhero identity comes from a blaxploitation movie.
Oh my God, that moment when she sees the VHS tape was so awesome. Yes.
Right, and her reason is because she looks like me, and a lot of these other people don't, right?
I was like, oh, yes.
Right, and she's so aware of the racism she's experienced that, like, when she's giving Dr. Manhattan a choice of bodies, she doesn't give him the black one first. She gives him a bunch of white bodies because she's kind of trying to buy into that whole thing. And she's like, basically, her best friend is a white man who turns out to be a white supremacist, right? And she tells him she has no family. So she's got this whole disconnection from where she came from because of what life has done to her when she was a child. And then the whole story is about her, through her reconnection with Will, realizing that it does matter where I come from, and I do care about family, and I do want to understand why all of this shit is happening to me. And so I think at the end, it's such a quiet scene when she invites her grandfather to come home with her. But like, I got a little teary when she did, because it was just like all the stuff she'd been denying that she wanted throughout the whole series. Like, she finally admits, like, yeah, I want this. I want family. I want to know who I am. I want to know who I came from. So I really loved Angela's story.
Yeah, Stacy says I loved all the parallels in her life and her grandfather's. Okay, so Wade, who I think Wade is a favorite for a lot of us here. Yeah, this is Tim Blake Nelson. He's always awesome. And he was just, I can't imagine anybody else ever playing Looking Glass. Like, he was just so great. So what is his arc?
I think his arc is one of disillusionment too, but it's kind of an interesting parallel with Will, because Will has the disillusionment of a black man who thinks he can make society better and discovers that there's all this inherent racism holding him back. And Wade is like a white man who, by all outward appearances, you kind of expect him to be a white supremacist, but he's like deeply wounded. And he's like, the very first time you see him, his boss says, come over, pull your face down and come over here, and so that I can use you as a mirror to tie my tie. So he's like, you've got the white supremacist claiming to be disenfranchised, but he actually is disenfranchised because of who he is and how deeply
his origin story was phenomenally good.
Oh my God.
It was so great. And then, like, I mean, we all like Mirror Guy, and then we see how Mirror Guy was kind of born. And then we love Mirror Guy. We're like, oh, Mirror Guy.
I want that mask so I can walk around.
Yeah, his character is actually the closest connection to the original comic that we get. not just visually, but also they're both a product of childhood trauma, or at least trauma in the distant past. And you see their masks, because you'll see Looking Glass eat with the mask up, just like Rorschach does. He eats beans, not just in the movie, but in the comic that way. But whereas Rorschach's mask is, the ink blot, which is, that's how we see, that's our psyche reflected back to us. The Looking Glass is reflected back to us. I love that. And that parallel with the actual comic.
Yeah, another example of great parallelism between the two. Okay, Lori, who, I loved Lori because she brought a different voice to all of this. Like, she was snarky, but it was lighthearted. She was always a good time when she was on the screen. And to Johnny's earlier point, she did a great job of addressing objections for the audience. So what was I know what her function was. She's not quite comic relief, because it's not like she was busting punchlines every 5 minutes, but she did, there was enough of it, and she did kind of lighten the scenes that she was in. So I know her function, but what was her arc?
Her arc was really understated, but basically, even though she had kind of thrown herself into the whole anti-vigilante thing, there's a point early in the series where Keen basically says, "Help me out and I'll get L-Man out of prison for you," which was the superhero that she fell in love with after Dr. Manhattan. I can't remember, Dryberg, I think was his last name, but I don't remember his superhero name. But basically, she was still tempted by that whole vigilante thing. And I think her arresting Adrian Veidt at the end was her deciding, no, I'm done with that. I totally want to be law enforcement. I totally believe that I'm going to work towards justice this way, legitimately, instead of with a vigilante thing. And I think that arresting Adrian Veidt was like her closure for all of the stuff that was up in the air at the end of the first Watchmen.
Joel.
So she also illustrates how people can be directly influenced by parents, particularly the comedian was her father. And so in a way, she is kind of comic relief, because the comedian's big joke is that he's not funny. Never tell he's not funny ever. And so she was doing it. She took his last name, Blake, and she is essentially performing his role, this almost nihilistic role, as far as the masked vigilante milieu is concerned. And that's what I think she was there for. She was there to temper not our expectations, but the vigilante's expectations the same way the comedian did.
That's great. Yeah, Eileen.
Yeah, that I thought a lot about why she took her father's name, Blake, because then she told a story about how her father raped her mother, and that's how she was conceived. So what is that? What impact is that having on her character, that she knows her father's a rapist, but she took his last name? I thought about that a lot. What do you think, Bonnie?
I think she was kind of embracing her pain. She gives that little speech to Angela in the second or third episode, where she's basically saying people who wear masks are doing it because they have trauma, usually experienced as a child. I don't remember the exact quote, but she's basically saying the reason you wear the mask is to hide the pain. And Angela's like, no, I'm trying to protect myself. And she's like, yeah, from the pain. So I think it makes her super self-aware of the forces that shaped her. And I think she was very conscious about, this is why I'm being a vigilante. And because her mom was the first Silk Spectre. So she was basically choosing to carry on a tradition. Even though she took her father's last name, she took on her mother's superhero name. So I
do you think
she was
taking her father's, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think she was trying to come to peace through her identity with the fact that her father raped her mother.
And maybe it's taking superheroes.
Yeah, I think Joel has something to add here too.
Yeah.
Well, it's that her mother and Edward Blake, at the end of their relationship, sort of loved each other. And that's the thing, I think, that she's taken her father's name is because her mother, whether she was right to do it or not, forgave Edward Blake and says, she actually said that I love him and he loves me. And, she was, whether she was pretending or just doing it to protect Lori. She says, you know, she essentially said, "I forgave him. You should too." I think that might be why.
Okay, so our last one is our wackiest one, which is funny because the character himself is not wacky. Like, he's not a wacky character. I never thought of Adrian Veidt as wacky, but there's something kind of wacky about the presentation of his first few scenes in the series.
My favorite part of the Adrian Veidt thing was, maybe you guys will remember this because I'm almost positive Sean did it on a show. He was saying something real recently about, like, well, it's this kind of show. It's not like something that he wasn't. I don't think he was talking about Watchmen. It's not something that Jeremy Irons would be in. And it was like, what a random fucking thing to say that he's suddenly, because I hadn't watched Watchmen yet, to pull Jeremy Irons out. And I'm really curious about, like, when I watched, I was like, is that Jeremy Irons? Like, why was Sean telling me that Jeremy Irons wouldn't be in something? I really wish I knew what you were talking about.
I don't know.
Is it being John Malkovich?
Such a random slight on Jeremy Irons.
I just could not stop thinking of John Cleese. I just saw those all as Monty Python.
Like John
scenes
Cleese's
over, you know?
character from the Muppet movie when Miss Piggy's climbing the house. Yeah.
Yeah, they were very British, those scenes to me, you know. Like, I mean,
They are. There's just kind of a wackiness to them, and I'm like, all right, I know this is going to go somewhere.
I had affection for those scenes because I do that sort of shit.
Yeah, no, that I figured. Okay, so what is his actual arc? I know his function is to be wacky, or at least to kind of tell us there's a different story. Like, I think that's what it's signaling to the audience, is that there's something bigger here, and it will tie in. Just be patient.
I think it is actually him realizing that he doesn't want to be a god. There's that scene where he's bemoaning, like, oh, nobody knows I saved everybody by killing 3 million people. President Redford won't take my calls even though I put him in power. Humans are still using nuclear devices even though I gave them all these amazing high-tech things that are alternate sources of energy. And John says, I can send you to this paradise populated with creatures who exist to serve and whose love is unconditional but unsatisfying. And
he cries out of one eye. He's like, yes,
he's like, please send me there. It sounds like paradise, right? And then he gets there and it's not paradise, it's hell. And I think I think his arc is him realizing that his delusions of godhood, like what it would actually be like to be a god, is like he doesn't want to be a god.
Okay, so this is the stealing episode. What are we stealing from this? Like, what did we pick up? I mean, Bonnie, you can kick this off, and anybody who had something to grab. What did you learn from the way that characters were handled in The Watchmen that you'll want to be cribbing from? Like the way they were developed, just how those individually, but also this show is excellent at relationships. So it wasn't just how this character is defined, it was how this character interacts with this other character and influences this character. And, you know, it's like great acting is reacting. I think that's really true. We saw this where great character development is reaction to other characters.
One of the things I really admired was the way that they told Angela and Will's story and used them to reinforce the emotional impact of each other. And that kind of ties into how they use nostalgia as a plot device. Like they had Angela, they didn't just have her experience Will's memories and show them as a flashback. They had her experience them and showed the memories to us with her in them, experiencing his pain and having those emotional reactions to what was happening to her grandfather. And then they would do things like they would intercut things that happened to him and then things that happened to her that kind of reinforced the impact of each other. Like they showed his parents dying and then her parents dying. And like, it was when she was coming down off of nostalgia.
Yeah, that was beautifully done.
There was bleeding, right. And it's like, it makes both of those losses that more poignant. And she's experiencing both of them as far as we're understanding the story. It's like, we're seeing her reactions after having seen Will's reactions. And I think it just did an incredible job of showing, like we saw how hard it was for him to be a superhero. And then we saw how hard it was for her to be a superhero in all the same ways, even though so many details around it had changed. I think that just I think it was part of what made her story so amazing. we were saying that it's not just that, like you're talking about, the inherited trauma on top of the trauma she's already experienced, which is already awful.
Anyone want to add? Yeah, Marie.
I really love the way it all ended up actually tying together, like, because the first couple of episodes, especially with Adrian Vaught, where he's just off doing his own thing and we keep cutting to him, and again, because I am a newbie to this universe, I had no idea who this guy was. All I was seeing was this weird guy who was doing weird things, and and then he's like killing a bunch of clones, and it just, none of it made any sense. And you know, I kept going because, you know, everyone told me that it was worth it, and it ended up being worth it, and finding out that, you know, he was sort of a huge, like, catalyst for all the other things that have happened in this world, and how he kind of helps helps resolve things in the end with the frozen squid rain. And I just really enjoyed the way they had, like, all these different, that was the example that came to mind, but they had a whole bunch of things. Like, I was always wondering who that little boy was, because, you know, it was like 5 minutes of it was the cold open of the first episode, and obviously he has to be important, and just all these, like, little things that just all ended up tying together and making sense and being a part of a bigger whole was really cool to watch.
Joel.
It was the purposeful contradictions that I liked most, not just with the characters, because every time, or they wouldn't let you think one way or another about a character. Once you thought they were virtuous, they did something questionable or downright terrible, or vice versa. But they also did it with the narrative, in that they would literally have somebody say something like, "Don't trust nostalgia. Nostalgia is bad. Don't get too deep into nostalgia," or some broader narrative thing where they literally are contradicting what they just showed you a moment ago. I like that very much.
Yeah, I liked how you just cared about each of the characters, and they would do it by, like, this story had amazing origin stories, which is one of the hallmarks of superhero narratives, right? The origin story. But these origin stories were like, you know, Looking Glass with, you know, the funhouse shattering around him while he's going through, like, psychic trauma that we can't even imagine, right? That's a hell of an origin story. Or, you know, Angela seeing the video and her parents being slaughtered. Like, that's a origin story we care about. Will, you know, being dragged and, you know, hung, and he's still got the noose around his neck, and he tries to be hero, puts the bag over his head, right? Like, everyone got their story, and we could genuinely, like, identify with how it turned them into the person they were, and then how they're interacting with everybody else in their life. And even the origin story of Angela and Dr. Manhattan's relationship, you know, was just so beautifully told. Like, I love time paradoxes. It's one of the things I've stayed away from as a writer, because I think that they're confusing as shit. And the way this was done was really playful, right? So, you know, like, in 1 second, your favorite song's gonna come on that radio, you know, and then, you know, her favorite song comes on the radio, and she's like, "I've never heard this song before." You have now, and now it's your favorite. You know, and it's like, I just love stuff like that. And it could have been cheesy. It wasn't cheesy at all. It was perfect, and it was perfect because at that point we already had been given Angela's origin story, and now someone else is, you know, having this conversation with him, and or with her, who knows her and knows her trauma, because he knows everything, and she's told him all these stories, even though they're just meeting for the first time. And we already have a relationship with Angela. We don't have a relationship with Dr. Manhattan, but we have a relationship with the storyteller. And so we're entering that episode and that conversation with a lot of established trust. And that came from character building. By the time we're in episode 8, we're like, oh, you know your characters. So wherever you're going to take me during this very wild, you know, I mean, he's picking her up in a bar. Like, like there's nothing romantic about getting picked up in a bar, right? And yet it's this wonderfully romantic scene from the first shot where you just see his feet and you see him walking on the crowded streets and you see all these, like, it looks like Mardi Gras, like there's just shit all over, and he picks up a blue mask, and you know, like, just everything about that is so wonderful. But it doesn't, that same scene in the hands of a different storyteller might have been showy, and this wasn't. Everything was grounded in character. So what I loved about the characters was how much the writing respected them as people and not just cardboard to move the story along. Bonnie.
One thing I thought kind of that I'm thinking of as you're saying that is also how they handled the villains. One thing that really shocked me on the second watching was how obvious that Kane and Judd were in terms of things they said dialogue-wise.
Yeah, right.
That, like, I gave them, because Angela is friendly with Judd, and you know he's you first see him as, like, he and his wife are the only white people in an audience watching Black Oklahoma, right? And then she's teasing him about, like, why she didn't go to Black Oklahoma. She says, yeah, you just are mad you didn't have anyone to roll your eyes at while you were watching it. And he calls it Black Oklahoma, and she's like, you're not allowed to call it that, right? But she's teasing him, like, in a very friendly way, right?
But they're friends. Like, she's even, he went off to the bathroom to, you know, do a bump of coke, and he comes back, she notices it, but it's like, oh, well, that's what he does. Like, there's a camaraderie there that it boils down to trust. Like, that's shorthand. You see that he did coke and she's okay with it. There's trust between them.
Yeah, and you totally buy into that. But when you listen to some of his dialogue on the second time, he's totally saying things that, like, you could interpret him as, like, not really sympathizing with the Black community at all. And then he has that conversation, which was an amazing scene, and it was so creepy the first time, and the second time I understood what was going on, with the wife of the cop that got shot. And he's being you think he's being super friendly and reassuring, and he reaches out and touches her, and she's being, like, so fearful and submissive in terms of her body language. And then that conversation ends with her saying, he liked you, and he said, no, he likes me, right? And the first time it was like you thought he was trying to comfort her, and the second time it was like, oh my God. She, like, really is afraid of him, and she has a reason to be afraid of him, and he's just very, like, asserting his dominance when he says, no, your husband likes me. And so I just thought, like, there were so many little touches that, like, as I was watching him in that first episode and just, like, totally suffering for his death the first time, and the second time it was like, oh my God, he's so deserved to die.
Right, and there's things that you take for granted. You don't even think about him. Joel pointed one of them out in the chat. He shows up at her bedside, his arm's in a sling, and we're like, oh, he survived. The second time you're watching that, you're like, how did I not question this? How is a thinking person who puts stories together for a living just let this go right by me? And that's what I love about this, is the show actually had several moments like that, and that's just great writing. Dave. Oh no, you were just scratching. So no one scratch. Okay, so let's move to plot storytelling techniques. What can we learn about delivering exposition from the way Watchmen interwove the past and present storylines? Because this is my number one favorite thing about the show, was exposition. You know, we have a joke that, like, never send your character to exposition laboratories, because we've seen that in, you know, like, so many movies where something has to be explained. So they go, and the scientist who's in one scene, you know, he works at exposition laboratories, and he tells, you know, everybody exactly what's going to happen. And it's usually a moment that's cut for a trailer, you know, and it's that line of dialogue can be in the trailer. They're going to feel it from coast to coast, you know, and that's what the scientist says, where he's shaking his fists. And this show didn't have any of that. All the exposition was delivered in dialogue or in props or scene setting or color, you know, as Ben pointed out earlier. It was very intentional, and nothing was heavy-handed. And this show might have had more exposition than anything I've ever seen, because it had to make sense to people who have seen the Watchmen or know the lore, and totally function for people who didn't have exposure to that, while also just being entertaining, and it was really thoughtful and had a lot on its mind. And so there was a lot of information, and yeah, it never felt overwhelming. And that's art. Yeah, Joel.
I think one of the things is because nobody was united in looking for the big mystery. Everybody just had their own little thing that they were doing that just happened to be related to everybody else's. I think that helps a lot with exposition, where you don't have to explain the big thing because all the little things are being satisfied.
Yeah, that's true. That's like what Bonnie was saying earlier about you got a little bit from Will's POV, and then you got, from Angela, the same thing, and on and on and on. And whether, it was about White Knight or whatever, you got it from all these different perspectives. And it's because there wasn't like, where in the original Watchmen, it's a murder mystery. So everything has to kind of revolve around one central question. And we had a lot of questions here.
There were a couple of things that storytelling wise I would love to steal for the future. And one of them was that propaganda letter that it almost felt like a throwaway, right? Because it was just something that Will's dad scribbled a note, watch over this boy. But then it became the window into the previous generation's experiences of racism, for Will and for Angela, and then of course for us through them. The second thing I really want to steal is the way that they used American Hero Story, where they basically told, like, what does everybody think Hooded Justice was like, and it was told with all this machismo and sensationalism and like over the top, what does white culture think a superhero ought to be, and how manly a man should he be, and like what kind of sordid things should he get wrapped up in, right? And he was just like super cool. He always had like a punchy one-liner, right? But then the actual Hooded Justice, we saw how much fear and humiliation and frustration the actual Hooded Justice went through. And I just love that whole idea of like, let me give you what everybody thinks, which is total bullshit, and then let me give you the real story underneath it, and interweaving those so that you're just like slowly discovering like that through contrast.
Yeah, I don't think there's a specific thing that I would borrow, but I would say that it's one more really good example of confident storytelling. But I felt that same way about like The Haunting of Hill House or any other great thing that we've seen, where there's an assumption that like, okay, hang with me and you'll get this, rather than one specific thing.
I think I saw Joel's hand.
Yeah, one of the things, and this is to what Bonnie was talking about, that flyer, the German girl during World War I who was typing that up, her name was Muller. And then the German strongman who was supposed to be Hooded Justice was also Muller. I don't remember if they were explicitly related. I just thought that was interesting. But as far as the American hero goes, that directly reflects Tales of the Black Freighter from the original comic. And if you really want to see how the mirror of the overall narrative is in that comic, in that in-universe comic, it's worth going and reading that graphic novel to see how they weave that together. And even though this isn't directly related to the movie, it's like a 4-hour old edition of that movie in which they actually intercut an animated version of Tales of the Black Freighter into the movie, which does enrich it. It's very similar to the feeling you get from the comic. It's a very neat device, and I would love to steal the shit out of
it. Yeah, that is absolutely worth it. I think the layering, I think for me, this, not on every project, obviously, but on stuff that has a lot of world building like this, Watchmen to me is a very strong argument for one more pass. Like, just go ahead and go through your draft again and find places to put that extra stuff, because now you know how the story ends. And, especially if you've gone through it, let's say you've done your 3 drafts, maybe pass it through a 4th time. Even if you're a great writer I can get something really clean, with my say it, say what you mean, say it well, 3 drafts. But the world building is especially robust in something, give it a 4th draft, give it a 4th pass, because you will know so much about that story and that world that things will pop up in your storytelling that will just elevate it, will just make it so much better. And that's, we're lucky because we do get to collaborate all the time. And when one of us has a story question, we have access to a lot of creative brains that are just instantly there to like help us with the story. And I did feel the writer's room in, watching the Watchmen. And, I think it was Dave who said that in the podcast, which is worth listening to. It's Damon Lindelof and, oh, damn it. Why am I blanking on his name? The guy who wrote Chernobyl, Greg Mason. And it's really good. And not only does it explore, it asks a lot of questions that you want to think about too. And what Dave said is that Damon Lindelof gives a lot of credit to his writer's room, and he does. He constantly is saying, oh, this was so-and-so, this was so-and-so, I can't take credit for this. And that's how it should be done, because it clearly was not one person behind something this layered. There's a lot of different perspectives. And I also liked, one thing he said, he's like, look, dude, I'm a white dude. Like, I needed other people to help me with these perspectives. And that was clear. There's a lot of empathy in something that, it's a comic book movie, ladies and gentlemen. It's like but it was just better than it. I would just wish all of our entertainment was that considered. Okay, well, let's close this down with world and setting techniques. So I think that world was hugely influential in how this felt. And, it's not just like the alternate universe there. Okay, so there's 2 ways that world really affects this story. There's the real world stuff, like setting it, at the epicenter. Ground zero for this narrative was the 1921 Tulsa, not massacre, but like kerfuffle. What do they call it, Dave?
A whoopsie daisy, I think.
The 1921 whoopsie daisy. So setting it there, but also the branching, narrative of, okay, well, what were the results of that if it was handled differently, all the way to now Robert Redford is, president, and their intermittent squid showers, like all of those things made a very believable world. But to Bonnie's incessant point, how did they tie into character? Right? So thoughts, anyone? Bonnie.
One of the things that I really loved was about how they use masks to kind of give you like little hints about the characters. Like I feel like Will was painting himself white, right? And like that was literally letting you know that even under the hood, he's still hiding who he really is from everyone. Whereas Angela, she painted that mask area black, right? She was kind of reaching for her heritage, and like she had kind of assimilated into white culture, and she was kind of reaching for like, but where did I come from, and what's this other part of me that I haven't been exposed to? And I thought also Petey wears this like really silly Lone Ranger mask, right, when he's having sex with Laurie Blake, and he's oh, sorry about this. Hold on.
Why do I not remember this? Did I fall asleep with Petey and Laurie Blake? You guys have mentioned that times.
It's just one really brief scene where he shows up at her hotel room, and she's taking out this like ginormous blue vibrator, and then he knocks on the door, and he's
I clearly fell asleep during that.
I don't think he's wearing the mask then, but he wears it like afterwards. We see them both in bed. She's awake and he's asleep, and he's wearing a goofy Lone Ranger mask. And it kind of like, it's like, it tells you that even though he's like, hey, don't treat me like I'm a fan, I'm this historian dude, right, who studied superheroes very seriously, but he's still a fan. Like, it kind of lets you know that he's got that childhood fantasy. And then the warden wears this very improvised Lone Ranger mask that looks like a kid made it to be in a school play or something. And that's totally what the warden is, right?
It is a school play, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think Joel already commented on Looking Glass's mask basically just being whatever people look at him, they just see themselves reflected. They don't really see him. So I thought that was really, really fascinating. And then they had different people have different opinions on the masks too. Like Blake was talking about how it's about pain. You're protecting yourself from pain. Angela's father was saying that he tells her people who wear masks are dangerous and we should be scared of them. And Angela says, it's just pretend, Dad. And then her dad says, it's just pretend until it's real. And when you're a little older, you'll be able to tell the difference, which is like just such a delicious irony. And then Adrian Veidt is like, mask, I gave you the warden a mask because masks make men cruel. So I just thought that was like really cool how they did all these different things with masks.
I love that moment at the end where he asks the game warden asks him, was I a worthy adversary? And he says, no, you are not. It's so awesome. Joel.
I like how the technology dictates character a lot too, because imagine if the internet existed in this world the way it does in our world. There's a lot less detective work, a lot more information, and it just wouldn't be the same. So that could also be a thing to steal, is how the narrative of your story is dictated by how easily someone could get information.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't really think of that, but that's really true because if you write now, smartphones are kind of like fuck you a little bit because it makes it harder to tell a good story because you could always be like, well, what about the smartphones? And so that's why like one of the things that I'm outlining is in the 90s, which makes me really happy. Like it's just a different time and place.
Nintendosaurus.
Yes. But in this story, we got a lack of technology we got different technology, which was exciting because it's the same time. So we could, like, Toyotas all look the same. There's no difference in the Toyotas, but we got, they didn't have phones that they could pull out of their pocket and change the narrative. So yeah, I like that a lot. Anyone else? Dave, what are you going to steal?
Well, I like the alternate world setting where things are just a little bit off. The thing I like the most about the show is the mystery of what's going to happen. Like I need mystery in my show, and as long as there's mystery, I'm very much involved. I like the layered settings. I like, how the different characters, like there really was a lot of moral ambiguity. I mean, even Adrian Veidt, like what he did was bad, but he saved
But it's just
the world.
3 million people.
It's just New York. I mean, really. I mean,
by
they're
that
asking
argument.
for it, aren't they?
As a storyteller, I was swayed by that argument. In real life, it would be a lot harder. But I was like, well, wait a minute. If he really knew and if he really did prevent nuclear war, like if that was a real thing, there's a validity to that argument, even though 3 million people died. So I don't know.
He should have picked somewhere where there were less people, but I guess, you needed the big spectacle.
He should have dropped it on like a VFW hall in rural Duluth.
Yeah, I think New York, you're going for maximum like fear. Like, here's
should have
another.
did it on New Year. Was it on New Year's Eve? I don't remember.
No, it wasn't. But they had. There was also just another great little world building thing. That commercial that they had, where they showed like, I go back to New York too. Like,
oh yeah.
The only time we have squid here is fried. And it's like, okay. But you could see them trying to get that commercial going. And like, that's another example too of just great exposition. That's a way of saying, nope, people are still afraid even after all this time without having to, go to exposition laboratories where they show graphs of people's, psychographics and fear or whatever.
And Joel pointed out that Dr. Manhattan agreed that it was the right thing to do because he's taking emotion out of it. He's purely looking at it, from a different perspective.
Thing. Yeah. Right. All right. Anyone else on what they want to steal before we close this baby down? Bonnie.
I really love the support group, the squid support group that Wade was running. It was like such a great way for him to reveal what story he's telling himself, that it's the lie he's telling himself that is helping him say he's okay when he's really not. And then at the same time, you have other people in the group. There was one that was making fun of people who have bunkers and wrap their heads in tinfoil, right? And you see him giving that whole, I'm out of the tunnel and I'll show you how to get out too. When you just saw that he's doing all that crazy shit. Like that was just like so beautiful.
Yeah, that was awesome. And again,
I want to see Squid Fight Club.
That sounds really good. All right. Anyone have last minute thoughts? Okay.
Season 2.
Well, you know what? I do think there will be a season 2. I am with you.
Oh, you
Dave.
come around. All right.
Well, I don't think Damon Lindelof will do it. I'll actually be disappointed just because I want to.
You should do it.
I'm not equipped to do it.
We can all do it as a team.
But that would be fun. I would do that. I would take all of us and do it. That's a different story.
As long as I can have dead babies falling from the sky.
Oh no. So not necessary. Dan says in season 2, only 200 people will die in the massacre. Dave, when you get a chance, can you decide exactly how many people it takes to make a massacre? Just so
I didn't say it wasn't a massacre. I said that you made it sound like the whole town died.
Wasn't the Boston massacre?
No,
just
Dave's
people?
words were it was no big deal.
I think I said Black Lives didn't matter if it was only 300 or less. That's
Oh, wow. Okay, there was a soundbite I wouldn't want recorded, but okay.
Obviously, I'm kidding.
Quick,
Jesus.
Jen, excise it.
Look how red Dave is right now.
Oh, he's going to be
Fuck
wanting
all
us
of
to
you.
retract this episode.
No.
Here come the emails.
5 minutes from now, it's going to start in Slack. Can you just not record that episode? Anyway, this was a lot of fun. I think we need to watch shit together more often. Especially maybe we'll all be watching more stuff now. Anyway, until next week, I'll see you guys. Thanks for listening.
See y'all.
Just looked up massacres and Tulsa is listed in Wikipedia.
I didn't say it wasn't a massacre.
Tulsa race riot.
You implied that Sean was just being overly sensitive.
Okay, wait. Who can stop the recording? Because I cannot. I don't have permission.
Sean's nose is a massacre.
Can anybody stop the recording?
No, it's just going to keep recording.
Okay, Dave, can you see if you can stop it?
It doesn't. I don't see. No.